Så, nu ska jag prata om Kommerskollegium, för här i Sverige har Kommerskollegium nyligen fått i uppdrag av regeringen att inrätta ett rådgivande organ för att främja innovativ och klimatfokuserad standardisering. Redan 2017 fick däremot Storbritannien världens första standarder för cirkulär ekonomi, och vår nästa gäst deltog i arbetet med att ta fram dem. Han är även medlem i den kommitté som sedan 2019 arbetar med att ta fram de globala standarderna, och han är dessutom en av grundarna till The Center for Sustainable Design vid University for the Creative Arts i Storbritannien, som startade redan 1996. Nu ska vi se om jag kan släppa in honom. Welcome to the program, Professor Martin Charter.
Thank you very much, or Tug.
Tug, that's right. The British Standards for Circular Economy, the BSI 8001, were introduced already in 2017. I imagine after long and hard work and many compromises. Can you explain the process that led up to the resulting standards, please?
Yeah, sure. So somewhere, trying to go back into my memory of so around about 2013-14, BSI had sort of identified the emerging interest in circular economy, and then they went out really to do a scoping study originally to assess what standards existed broadly around circularity. And as a result of that, there was a series of discussions, and then a large stakeholder meeting was held, which I always remember, this huge room of different stakeholders, some positive, some neutral, and some negative, as we see in these things generally. So, excuse me, and then at some stage there was a sort of agreement to go forward on a standard, and a series of these larger meetings were held where discussions started, and then a chairman was appointed from industry to start to lead more serious development of the standard. And then there was a sort of voting process of those who wanted to join a sort of technical editing committee. So that then took us down from sort of 60 people to 10 people, and therefore made things potentially a lot more manageable in taking the content development of the standard forward. So that group was then comprised of industry members. There's a lawyer in there, a couple of technical waste experts, a couple of sort of leading think tanks in there. Industry, as I mentioned, and I was sort of part of that team as well. So effectively, a lot of the development and writing of the stand was done in that small group, and at certain stages it was then released, in a sense, to the wider stakeholder group for comment. So, and I think that if we would be managing by committee, as we see in ISO, it would have taken a lot longer to develop than in this smaller group.
Yeah, okay. But did you in the end establish consensus and agreement among the whole group of 60 stakeholders? Or
I mean, in that sense, the biggest issues around consensus were in the group writing the standard. So it's slightly different from the sort of ISO process. So we did have, given it was the first standard and it was the first time a lot of these issues being brought together, there was a lot of debate. There was despite, excellent knowledge in the room, there was gaps in knowledge. And even when we launched the standard, we recognized that some parts were stronger than others. And that was all part of the relevant development of the thinking. So particularly the area that created a lot of debate was the definition. And we dealt with the definition right at the very end because there was so much debate. So there was, as I said, at stages within the process, the standard was put out certainly to the stakeholder group and potentially, I can't remember the process, to a wider group in the UK. And then, as normal in standards, people had their opportunity to comment but it wasn't, let's say, a large group consensus process that went on as we would see in ISO.
No, but how can businesses apply those standards, the BSI 8001? Are they applicable to?
Well, I mean, that's it was the first standard about implementing circular economy within organizations. So the key audience is organizations. And one thing that I forgot to mention that was innovative relative for standards development within the process is that we actually, prior to the launch of the standard, tested a number of the clauses with companies. So we recruited we got additional funding to recruit 5 to 10 companies, product and service organizations, to test the clauses in small groups in their organizations to work out some of the bugs. So we did ground truth it with organizations, and it was designed to be very flexible around realities of organizations and the sort of realities of advanced companies, less advanced companies. So there was a sort of starting point wherever you were in the awareness level.
Yeah. So you are deeply involved in the committee for global standards. When do you think we will see global standards for circular economy?
Well, it's a highly complex process, not just in terms of content, but I mean, we're looking at the, hundreds of international experts at the moment because of COVID online. Yeah. This is tricky, and there is a huge variation of knowledge and experience and let's say loudness of voices in the room. Some of the most knowledgeable people aren't necessarily the loudest in the room, let's say. So this is a real challenge, and at the moment there are 5 standards in development. So we have I forget the specific numbers at the moment, but let's go through it like this. Working Group 1, this is covering the core concepts, the terminology, the framework for implementation in organizations. Working Group 2 is on circular business models. Working Group 3 is on measuring circularity. Working Group 4 is a sort of case study type guidance standard. And there is a new standard on product circularity data sheets on how to collect and communicate data. So we're still on all of those standards at the expert comment stage. So literally as we speak, 1 or 2 days ago, the second draft of the core standard, Working Group 1, was launched for comments. So, for example, there will be so what will happen then is that comments will come in from international experts on that, and then those comments will be addressed within the process. They'll dependent on the challenges or not, there may be another working draft produced before it then goes out as a document for national comments. And so given the complexity of the issues, the fact that we're still working remotely, and the high level of comments that are going to come in, I'm potentially expecting the standard to be published based on my experience, but nobody quote me on this, but based on my experience of the process and actually launching, being the convener of other eco-design standards in the past, I reckon we're looking at 2023 or possibly early 2024. So it's still a way off, and Sweden is quite heavily involved in some of the, through SAS and the experts in the process. So yes, it's not a fast and speedy process, standards.
When they're launched, do you think they will have an effect on businesses and move us towards a global economy?
Well, I think from work we were doing, we did some work where we were employed to produce a report on the state of the art on circular economy to feed into the G20 process for the Italian presidency. There was definitely a need for a consensus, an international consensus over definitions and terminology, because there's still, one person's refurbishment might be another person's remanufacturing. So there's still not a common language. And I think one document based on significant international dialogue and consensus around the concepts and the terminology will be very useful to get everybody on the same page. I mean, of course, the issues are, where are the drivers, and are there business opportunities in terms of new products, new business models, cost savings. So we are, and again, I've seen it emerge recently again, conversation. We've had the conversations in the past about peak oil, for example, and a couple of years ago we had we reached peak materials, and it's all gone went very quiet. But I've heard that starting to come into conversation. So of course at the moment the focus is net zero, is carbon. With COP coming up, and the commitments companies are being made, but there are a significant circular economy is a significant business issue. There are risks, in terms of access to raw materials. There is growing policy and regulation from the European Commission and in national countries, and you see different materials or materials generally starting to come into the discussion. So particularly plastics. Plastics is has become a big hot potato globally, and particularly issues around marine plastics, fishing nets, all these sorts of things. Never, people wouldn't really thought about that 10 years ago. So going back to your key question, will it accelerate circular economy? I can't answer that directly, but I think it will certainly, the guidance in the standards, I think, will certainly help people get on the same piece of paper. And it's always important for people when they're talking.
Yeah. So you have worked for such a long time in the field of circular economy and sustainability. Do you think things have moved forward last 25 years?
Well, I think some things have moved forward, some things have moved back. I think we're in the midst of a fifth green consumer wave at the moment, and the first one being in the 60s, the second one in the late 80s when we saw the publishing of the Green Consumer Guide. We saw, the finding of the hole in the ozone layer. And then we had, in my opinion, in the 2000s, we had a third wave around carbon, climate change really starting to bite. And, people, what is your personal carbon footprint? And then that sort of continued, but not, hadn't really until perhaps the mid 2010s really peaked again. And I think prior to the pandemic, we saw the emergence of another wave, and the difference with that, and particularly around climate change, and we had the sort of Greta Thunberg effect, where it's even we forget this. We did have the strikes around the world, significant engagement of youth, and I think that is the difference compared to the past. It was the engagement of youth, not just sitting and talking with teachers, but on the street. And that may be the difference between the millennials, the sort of 25-ish, who consider in all surveys climate change and broader to be a really important issue and going to affect the future, but maybe this Generation Z or whatever it is, I forget the acronym, they're perhaps, beyond talk and they're now about action. So I think that's a key driver potentially, but I think we're actually now in a fifth wave and it's morphing to include climate change, but also issues around nature and biodiversity. And I actually think the social and community dimension is actually getting stronger, particularly driven by the health-related issues and where people have spent more time in their communities and perhaps spent more time walking, outdoors. And that's aligned on a macro level with biodiversity and people like David Attenborough speaking out worldwide. So I think we are in the midst of a new wave that is has at the heart of it this drive towards net zero carbon. So I think in circular economy terms, the issues are, how we join those agendas up. So just a very practical little example. Back in where I'm based in Farnham in Surrey in the UK, we run a repair cafe. And what we do is we repair products, but we also measure the landfill diversion and the carbon savings associated with the retaining of products and value in systems. And, at the moment, we've done about 1,300 repairs, which represents nearly 4 tons diverted from landfill, which then in turn is about 40 tons of carbon savings. So it's about how we join these agendas up and how we help people to make those interconnections.
Yeah, we have an exciting future ahead. Thank you very much for joining Studio Cirkulär, and have a good day, Professor Martin Charter.
Thank you very much.
Då var programmet slut för idag. Jag tackar alla medverkande. Tack till alla er som har tittat. Den här sändningen kommer nu att textas och finnas sen på vårt YouTube-konto. Om cirka en månad är vi tillbaks igen. Håll utkik på LinkedIn och på vår hemsida. Och i vårt nyhetsbrev som ni gärna får prenumerera på. Så ni ska få adressen här till vår hemsida så att ni kan gå in och prenumerera på nyhetsbrev, så får ni alla nyheter kring allt vi gör och också Studio Cirkulär. Tusen tack för idag. Vi ses igen. Hej då!